Welcome, Clean Titans, and thank you for joining us for a conversation that hits that crucial and fascinating intersection: disaster relief and clean energy. Today, we have the immense privilege of speaking with Will Hagman, Founding Director of Footprint Project. Will is a nationally registered paramedic and a UC Berkeley graduate who is now pioneering a new philosophy of humanitarian aid by bringing mobile solar and storage to communities in crisis. Will, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to join you today.
Your background is so unique. You've been on the front lines of medical emergencies and disaster relief. What was the moment, the specific event or experience that made you realize that the power of source itself needed to be part of the solution?
It's a great question. Really, I think started. I was working as a paramedic in Minneapolis, actually, and I remember I was assisting with a patient transport where the person was ventilated, so they were sedated, and the machine was breathing for them. And we were transferring them from one hospital to another. And I was the driver. The critical care paramedic was the one who has more experience, was really running the show. But we came. I remember we grabbed the critical care paramedic partner, grabbed a Goal Zero. Do you know those little portable batteries? This is back in 2016, 17. And grabbed one of these little batteries, and we brought it up the elevator, put all the oxygen, the monitor, all this stuff, brought the gurney up the elevator, and put the patient on the gurney. And I remember asking the critical care paramedic, like, "Oh, this is interesting. You're bringing a battery." And they were like, "Normally, before these, we would have to breathe for the patient between about the 5 minutes it takes to get from the critical ICU, intensive care unit, to the ambulance where you could plug the ventilator back in." And so now they were using, and this is early, year before Footprint was even a thing. I noticed, they, instead of breathing for the patient, which risks, you're trying to move the gurney, you're trying to keep the patient breathing. If you mess it up, they could go into cardiac arrest. It's pretty critical. Everyone needs to breathe. We plugged the ventilator into the little Goal Zero battery to move, and that kept the ventilator on until we could get to the ambulance and plug into the ambulance. And so for me, that was one of the earliest moments of realizing, oh, wow, there's this whole link between electricity and critical emergency medicine or disaster work. And in spaces where there is no electricity, it's a very quick descent into basically retreat to the 1910s. People were dying for really terrible reasons. People, I guess, unfortunately, we are still living through scenarios like that, but the role of electricity in maintaining our quality of life, both in what I would consider the world of Minneapolis lifestyle or in lower or developing countries, is just so critical. So that was really one of the earliest moments.
My son did a project in 2009 when he was in school. They got these solar LED lanterns and sent it to teachers in Afghanistan.
Oh, super cool. It's just amazing. And I've said this before, but a lot of the work that we do in the domestic U.S. after major disaster power outages, is taking lessons learned from what we would consider low resource or developing countries, West Africa, East Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, just places where the grid was never fully built, and they're leapfrogging it, similar to cell phones and landlines. And so what we used to think as going, hey, we need to give this to you, the solar lanterns, to a rural health clinic in Uganda, we're actually, I think about a lot of the work that is being done in, for example, Myanmar right now, with partners that are deploying solar battery systems to keep health centers a lot powered up after the earthquake on the top of a conflict. Those experiences are directly informative or applicable to the next hurricane response in the Gulf. So for me, it's a very meaningful to see those. Oh, well, we thought we were going to be providing a service, and to be honest, we're often learning from or incorporating. It's a two-way street between as our grid gets less stable, there's more we can learn from the folks that have learned how to survive with a non-existent or completely destroyed grid, more in the areas of the world that experience significant suffering.
Your educational background is in peace and conflict studies. You wrote an extended thesis on military security and environmental degradation. How did the academic work, which seems so theoretical, inform the hands-on practical work you're doing today? What is the connection between conflict, security, and the need for resilient, decentralized power?
Wow, I haven't thought about that paper in quite a few years. But I guess I'd have to say that one, I wouldn't consider. I haven't been back to school since college, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But
You have more wisdom now.
exactly. Well, I love college, and I do enjoy. I've always liked looking at a problem from really zoomed out, and then finding a solution that is very zoomed in, similar to when I started working on what became Footprint Project. We were focused on, I was looking for solutions to environmental degradation and humanitarian aid. Basically the flip side to first do no harm. The idea that we spend, when a disaster happens, natural or conflict, whether you call it man-made or man correlated, however you define a disaster, when it hits, people want to provide help, resources, and they send things, and many times those things can do as much, or they're not the way people like to help often does not truly reach the ground. Whether you're talking about cash support is the most effective, but I remember hearing stories after the Haiti earthquake of folks in Minneapolis, where I'm from, trying to send winter coats and jackets that were just not appropriate, stuff that would end up in landfills after all of the carbon and shipping costs that it would take to get there. So
right, 90 plus degree temperature, you're not going to use many coats.
Exactly. And so when I think a lot of that interest was based on research I did in college about the link between the broad, sweeping global transition or instabilities of our environment, of our changing climate, right? The fact that humans have grown to a point, however many billions we are now, that we are effectively the asteroid. If you think about the dinosaur, right? We are the organism that has altered our small rock in space enough to drastically change the conditions of life over a period that we are living through, right? So we are in the moment. The asteroid has not hit Earth, but we are the asteroid that is incoming, right? We haven't reached enough. All 6 extinctions haven't happened, but we're on the path, right?
We're causing the 6th mass extinction now.
Exactly.
And you need to be in this narrow band of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and temperature for civilization and humans to live. You go above or below that, you get ice age, and above that, you get too hot a planet. And those transitions need to happen very slowly. So people say, this has happened before. Well, yes, but in millions of years, and that gives time for forests to move from Mexico to Canada, but not in hundreds of years.
Yeah, and I guess to answer your question, that I found it in college. I found it very interesting how the U.S. military is the largest climate consumer of gas and diesel on Earth. Right, they are, as a single institution, it has. If we were going to rank climate antagonists, maybe now the billionaires, now it may have changed since college, but maybe the top 10 billionaires. But other than that, and their institutions, but I would still imagine that the U.S. military as a whole is the largest climate causer, so to speak. And at the same time, they're in charge of U.S. national security. So I found that whole link to, all right, what is supposed to keep us safe, or what is the groups that are supposedly enshrined with the dedication to guarantee U.S. survival, is one of the major risk threat producers for our own survival. And that
It's
was
going to
directly
kill
in
us.
power. And I think a lot of
That's
folks that
ironic.
have, it's extremely ironic. And I think as I've grown up or I've grown older, and I know that there's a lot of communities that wouldn't find that surprising at all, right? But the electricity component really started to feed into my learning after college, after I started working in emergency medicine and humanitarian aid for other nonprofits before I started the Footprint Project. But it's all connected. It always is.
You've worked with a number of disaster relief organizations, including Team Rubicon. That gave you a close look at the existing systems. What was the aha moment when you realized that the traditional diesel generators and gas cans weren't just a logistical problem, but a humanitarian and environmental one as well?
I think that piece of the puzzle for me really clicked. I was working as a program manager in Guinea, West Africa during the tail end of the Ebola outbreak. And I was in charge of running a program that involved, originally was with funding from the CDC, was to buy 5 laboratories in rural Guinea, generators, refrigerators, and then train them on how to draw blood safely and ship it to a national lab so we could monitor the Ebola outbreak and a number of other diseases. And I had heard of solar generators. I had seen the Goal Zero in the ambulance for critical care paramedics in Minneapolis. I had done a little research on solar refrigeration and knew it was available, but I didn't know if it was locally procurable, and I asked one of our logistics folks in Conakry, Guinea, to see if we could spend the money on solar refrigerators instead of gas. And the procurement officer came back the next day with 3 quotes, and we were able to implement that piece, completely change the tech stack for that program in a way that took out the logistical and financial burden of maintaining 6 gas generators in a very remote part of Guinea. And coming off of that program, I burned out after that summer, and that just that process of realizing, hey, this is possible. It's not that hard, right? It's really just someone you have to decide to do it, but then upfront investment, strong payoff, both technically or logistically and financially for the program was just, I came out of that experience wondering, came back to the US, was working on ambulances again, and couldn't get it out of my head. Why aren't we doing this here in the domestic US? And that fall, Hurricane Maria hit, and was down in Puerto Rico with Team Rubicon, and it was just like the same problem of just taking blood pressures in Isabella, and the people were telling me, I don't need my blood pressure, I need my grandma on insulin. We can't get the tree down out of the road. My grandma needs power for her refrigerator to store insulin. I don't need this blood pressure, thanks a lot, but you need one that has a gas or a generator or power that I could bring up there. That's what I'm really coming down the mountain for. And it's just those, I think it was a couple core experiences that kept hammering. Kept beating me over the head with the problem. And I think that's part of the process of a startup, you got to see a problem and experience it really closely in order to understand the ways or the right approach to try to solve it.
For me, the realization came when I learned that when we were in Afghanistan, it was costing the military $400 plus for a gallon of gasoline. Can you imagine?
Yep.
$400. Yeah. And you can just put a huge amount of solar panels and batteries, and you don't even have to have all that. Transportation was the biggest disaster. Most of the soldiers died in transportation of all the food and equipment and fuel. And if you put solar and batteries, you could cut down that transportation significantly.
Well, and it's amazing that research. What's so interesting about this whole space, I think, is, all right, so the U.S. military is one of the largest carbon polluters on the planet. It knows that many of the folks that died serving the U.S. in Afghanistan were driving fuel convoys, right? Which has spurred a lot of research into temporary solar and battery solutions that now has kickstarted a whole industry that is a lot of that tech came out of the military and then is now percolating through down to consumers. And now we're living through a moment where the federal government has just gutted a lot of these programs that were based on our military research in the first place. It's hard not to, we either laugh or we cry, but it's just a bizarre.
Well, these days you can buy a solar flashlight, which has a regular flashlight, plus a security light, red, white, and blue flashing, plus room or area illumination light, all built into one and powered by the sun. You don't need batteries, you don't need anything.
It's just to watch this whole space over the past decade is still kind of mind-blowing to see this path that we've collectively been on, both in the renewable energy industry, but also in the disaster community and just the U.S., living in the U.S. over the last 10 years. I think living anywhere over the last 10 years has been a wild ride, but particularly domestically here. I'm calling from New Orleans, and it's just to see all these transitions that have happened. It's the fun part about being on podcasts is that you get to take a little step back and reflect.
I've seen your work in places like Puerto Rico and after Hurricane Ida. Can you walk us through what a mobile solar nanogrid is and how it functions in a disaster zone? What's the immediate tangible impact it has on a community that has just lost power?
Sure. Yeah. Talk or think about mobile solar nanogrids. You could also call them mobile microgrids. You could call them solar generators. You can call them many different, to say the same thing, which is a battery, a solar panel, an inverter, and some control system, right? Fancy or less fancy, that functions like a gas generator and produces usable energy on site to charge your phone, run your computer, on a Starlink now. Back in the day when we started this, there wasn't Starlink, but now that's a common use case for powering up for their fleet. And nanogrids, really just a word has come out recently as kind of like a microgrid is powering a building. You have solar on a hospital or a big facility. Oftentimes you hear about microgrids in the context of community level, like to the power grid, the lines overhead. And so this word nanogrid has come out of kind of more mobile or more nimble approaches to producing power using solar or renewables and batteries. Smallish forms can be that zero battery that you see, or those cell phone charger batteries that you see in the airport. You can rent for a couple dollars and recharge your phone. The day, the difference that technology stack has on a community that has just been impacted by a major power outage disaster is significant because, and some folks, disaster experts, I think, love to argue about what is you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs of like, you need air, you need water, you need to be able to, you need connection to your community, you have all the food, you need shelter. And in the emergency medical system or the medical standpoint, there's kind of, you can't breathe for more than, people can't hold their breath for more than 3 minutes. Most people can't survive for more than 3 days without water and more than 3 weeks without food. And if we think about how those critical services, shelter being, it's Minnesota in negative in the winter, might not even need water. You might not make it 3 hours in northern Minnesota without the right gear. If your car breaks down, die of hypothermia before you can even die of, but many of those immediate needs can require some level of electricity, right? We need fresh water at this point. Is really hard to find fresh water without electricity these days. For firefighters and, providing radios or doing search and rescue, you need drones, imaging, and Wi-Fi and connectivity. And so all of basically every need that our society kind of on has a backbone of electrons behind it. And in a disaster, those are all met by fossil fuel generators, meaning if the gas supply chain is broken, you run out of gas, is this still working? You good?
Yeah, I hear you.
Right. Yeah, your power, you can't, without electricity, your major disaster support functions crumble. And so being able to provide electricity without relying on a fossil fuel supply chain completely changes how responders operate in a major disaster power outage, and it changes how the communities that are affected by those disasters survive, thrive, recover. Just a game changing, it's a game changing technology for response, whether it's being done by a firefighter or the neighbor.
I have a little solar charger for my phone, like if
Mhm.
it goes out or something. Well, do those work in disaster areas? Have you used them?
Oh yeah, him all again like any major piece. It really depends on. It's kind of like saying how well does your computer work? Well, as type of computer is it right? Some people think a Mac is the best. Some people like a Linux because they can do things that you can't do with a Mac. Some people are like, I would never touch this unit. So it's a lot of that depends. But I would say that like the first piece of the puzzle is, hey, if you can keep your phone charged for more than one round of phone, your phone is at 52%. If the power goes out right now, I make a couple calls. I could take a couple meetings, but I could call 911 a couple times. But being able to recharge your phone is truly, like, in some ways more important than the finding filtering your water, right? Because your water, as long as the water system's still up, will come out of your faucet. But yeah, the little phone and device chargers are just, they didn't exist the way that they do even 5 years ago. And so they're just
They,
hugely.
they're getting pretty sturdy on the solar chargers.
Oh, yeah. These tech stacks are just rapidly improving, which is really exciting. And our job is to get them out the door to those who need them.
Your mission to help communities build back greener. Can you explain what that philosophy means to you? It's more than just replacing old tech. It's about a new way of thinking about resilience. How does a disaster become an opportunity to create a more sustainable future?
Sure. Yeah. Just parrot a word book I've been quite a bit recently. It's called Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. And the basic premise is that, disaster event, there's a massive tragedy, but there's also to reimagine communities and how they work and who benefits and whether they work for and they rely on to survive. And at the end of the day, for me, this work involves providing a vision or at least a potential, an option for communities looking to rethink or rebuild or reimagine their future in the wake of a recurring climate disaster events around the world with new types of energy solutions that can keep them to make the decisions they want to make. You're not trying to prescribe this doesn't work for every. So solar, this type of technology is not going to be appropriate in every disaster, but at the end of the day, communities that have been affected by major disasters do have a choice in how they recover, and that our part of our mission is to empower those communities to make that choice intentionally and not let it be made for them because they are in and put through an immensely vulnerable, traumatic community experience. And I think that it's more important than whatever tech or infrastructure solutions they choose into their recovery.
I saw a recent post from the Footprint Project about a partnership with North Carolina to invest in microgrids, infrastructure for critical facilities. What does this partnership mean to communities, and how does it shift the focus from reactive relief to proactive resilience?
Yeah, we're really lucky to and to be working in North Carolina for the long haul after Hurricane Helene. We are a larger grant from the state of North Carolina, collaborating with Land Guy Regional Council of Governments to develop and multiple, microgrids facilities that did resilience hubs in the aftermath of Helene, as well as develop a network of mobile renewable infrastructure that can be deployed across Western North Carolina as a tech lending library, but also deployed to the Eastern North Carolina or other parts of the state that are affected by future power outage emergencies. So for me, it's for Footprint, it's really a bus, the model that we've been piloting for years at this point, but really put it into kind of full focus with resources, how mobile and permanent microgrid infrastructure can be designed, built during and in the aftermath of after Helene and then next Helene. So we're excited to roll it out, and it really does offer us the opportunity in partnership with our local, institutional partners, North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, to provide this vision to really hey, North Carolina can be a leader in climate resilience by truly innovating at the forefront of grid electricity and power electronic technologies, and to help craft that with our.
How does your work, you hope, through positive feedback loops? What are some of those positive feedback loops you see in your work that combat that climate anxiety?
Yeah, it's a tough world out to get overwhelmed with both the macro and the problems of our that we're all through. I think I love feedback that they kind of crystallize. Yeah, we can build on positive momentum, or we can kind of succumb to a downwards collapse. Right. I think a lot of our communities, particularly across the domestic U.S., are very much looking at collapse as a real place-based experience, particularly for communities that have been historically marginalized and now are bearing the brunt of both federal disinvestment and recurring, social inequities along with environmental. What I find hopeful at work is that on the back of a incredibly traumatic experience that a community goes through when a major storm destroys much of the physical infrastructure, causes loss of life and morbidity and mortality, being able to respond in a way that to future disasters, for me is interesting. It gives me an immense amount of hope. And that's not to say that there's always knock-on work. We don't pretend that lithium batteries environmental consequence, right? We know that there's upstream environmental kind. There's kind of at some point you need to say, is there a way to do something better? And right now we don't have community, from a disaster response perspective, there are not a lot of tools out there to provide electricity in a major disaster that aren't gas or diesel generators, number one, or mobile lithium battery-based microgrids, and with solar panels and wind turbines. And so if we can offer them one step better, if we can, that for me is building a positive feedback.
I went to Ember. I don't know if you're familiar. They do a report on energy. They did the electricity report for 2025, and one of the analysts, and he was saying that by mid-century, you want to mine you could just mine the parking lots. For every one car, every one battery, the technology is getting better. You'll get 1.5 or 2 batteries, 2 cars.
Wow.
Wow. So and the other thing is that you only have to mine lithium once. And lithium, you don't use it up like oil and gas and coal. It doesn't just disappear. Poof.
Yeah,
it's still there. It's an element. It's just storing energy. It can be reused to store energy again, and even more efficiently as technology improves.
Yeah, and I can't wait for stuff they'll be in of lithium, right? Like this is moving so it's very it's not all roses, right? There's always tech solution. There's consequences, just like social. We all thought social media would be like, oh, the internet, like it's going to connect us all, and we all global society. And turns out that maybe like cyberbullying is a massive problem, and maybe was not, never meant to really connect people, to rape women for their looks back in college. There's like always. So I don't want to get. I don't.
And custodian batteries. sodium batteries are coming, and sodium
Yeah.
would have far less consequences. This sodium's everywhere, all over.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very out there, and I don't want to over cultivate. Like, let's always have a critical eye. There's always a second edge to any sword, any solution. Nothing's ever perfect. But
No free lunch.
exactly compared to running a gas from fossil fuels, it's just like it's as a no. This is an to community resilience technology portfolio that any have in their toolkit, and that's all we can really do is show up when communities need us, do what we do best, which is get the lights on with renewable technologies, and let the community leaders decide where to take that. Right, let them lead. From then on, we're just the back of house orders. But if we can show up with an infrastructure portfolio that can provide communities renewable power, clean power, that can produce clean water, and get the Wi-Fi back on, like what we're here to do.
Work sounds incredibly rewarding. Can you share a specific story of a community or a person you helped that truly captured the essence of the Footprint Project's mission?
Oh man, there are so many of those individuals out there that it's hard to it's all little snippets. But I'm a story that our program director Jamie got to meet right after Hurricane Helene. We were in Asheville. It was about 36 hours after, and had driven in. It was the Sunday after, so about 36 hours. And we were doing our first couple site assessments, and we had met with a solar company called Sundance Power. And I remember walking into their room, and it was very those were a couple there's still people wandering around with that glaze over their trauma. Seems they were not expecting this. They were not prepared. Fire stations were still putting signs out that said no. It was just really, really messy. And there was a note on this solar company's table from that said Barnardsville Community Hub is open. We're doing mutual aid power. If you have any solar equipment, we'll figure it out. And that note. So we had our check-in. We met the folks there, and then we ended up taking that note. And Jamie drove over to the Barnardsville Community Hub to see who wrote this note. And there was and this is her story. Now I'm just going to try to paraphrase it. She went to the community hub. There was this, active mutual aid hub, and those are like people helping people, right? Someone put a whiteboard. Someone says, "Hey, this person we can't get up the mountain here. This person needs some bottles of water. This person, in the community is, no, there was no like whiteboards and notes, right, at that point." And the gentleman that she met who had wrote this note of like, "Hey, we need power. If you can bring solar equipment, we can get this community hub up and running, power." And set up original. She tells a story about like she showed up to the aid hub, mutual aid hub, and there's this guy in a relatively dinged up, like with the back of his trunk open, and he has controllers, some car batteries, a bunch of wire, and some couple small solar panels. I'm setting up this solar generator to get power to this community aid hub. And so she's like, "Sweet, spend your time doing that. We just brought a solar generator, turnkey stuff. We have a trailer 3 miles away, 5 miles away. Let's get that over, and then you can focus on doing your mutual aid. She's like, we have some stuff don't worry about wiring it. Let's get your aid hub power, and then let's talk." And that gentleman is now our operations coordinator for North Carolina, and he's running our free store. And I just love that story because it kind of connect. There are always people are going to show up and help. There's always, what we've learned is there's one of those solar nerds, just like one of those off-grid folks that are into power, And that's our tribe. And if we can get those resources they need to do their thing, they will change the arc of a community. And that's what our Western North Carolina team is doing. That's Jamie Trowbridge and Kat and Harrison have really taken model and run with it. So I just love telling stories about our team.
The Footprint Project is a nonprofit, but you also founded a for-profit venture, Rent Solar. Can you tell us about that model? How does building a sustainable revenue stream through Rent Solar allow you to support the humanitarian mission of the Footprint Project?
Yeah, absolutely. And caveat, so that entity has been sunset. So the original idea of using rental revenue as a separate business to support Footprint has kind of let's just to simplify it, it's multiple iterations, and hopefully we won't tap code. I can't promise it, but I've banged my head against the social enterprise model to support recurring revenue for disaster response for many, many years now. At the end of the day, we know this technology has, applications and use in blue skies as well as skies, and that there are moments and ways to generate revenue over it from existing tech, right? When it's not serving a need. And I have yet to solve that puzzle. I think it's a work in progress to figure out to develop for profit or cooperatively profitable, ventures that can meet the govern in a way that they can meet an investor's rate of requirements for private investment, as well as be non-disaster, because there's a disaster capitalism out there. And I think we're scratching at the surface of figuring out cooperative ownership structures that can engage private capital. It doesn't, where the VCs or the investors don't, the community, of the work. And so Rental that ended up merging with a different company. And I could never figure out do the joint venture structure in a way that we are looking at. I haven't up on that because we do rent, Footprint, does rent our equipment to live, non-disaster, we do revenue share non-disasters. It's just I think we need a big enough fleet and a big team to do both, rent equipment to Bonnaroo at the same time responding for a lien. So it's a work in progress.
You've provided clean power for firefighters and other first responders. Why is that specific partnership so crucial to your work? And what are the biggest challenges you faced when trying to scale a mission like that?
Yeah, the partnerships what's funny is bulk, first responders is kind of, you could call them like professional responders. Firefighters, we work with volunteers, right? Rural. A lot of people don't know this, but backbone of rural firefighting is all fire stations with people that have that have a beeper, and they're like, and this is after there was a solar generator we deployed to a station where it was all volunteer, and the assistant fire chief is, as far as I know, still working minor. So he's, has his radio, his beeper, and volunteers at his shifts. And so whether firefighters are an obvious, they're often on the front lines of it, they are serving their community. They're very local. They're very place-based. There's challenges working with law enforcement in many ways in this current political climate, some and for certain disaster response, particularly certain communities in political time, law enforcement is not, if you want to serve a community, showing up enforcement is a great way to not ever see that community again, right? So I think for us, when we're looking at responders and how to engage with them, because the three major buckets are firefighters, cops, and paramedics. Paramedics are often so busy and they're usually connected to the hospitals, and they're operating on a kind of a separate tempo. You're not going to ambulance often. A lot of the recon or site assessments, they're just taking patients. They're got the flood of 911. They're taking the folks that need to get to the hospital. Firefighters are often engaged in the station is the staging area for the FEMA. There's just a lot of connection there for how we can activate mobile microgrid in a disaster. And I would just also call out, the more we can train those folks, so frontline first responders, firefighters mainly, but any frontline first responder to engage with renewable total wind. I'd also just say that there's a lot of community responders out there, like the neighbor. We think that the firefighter is going to help us. Really, it's the neighbor. Like your neighbor is going to get to you. Big disaster. FEMA's not coming, and your local fire station is going to be overwhelmed. So, at the end of the day, community responders are where we do a lot of our we're trying to change the system by getting this into the hands of first responders and disaster response agencies. But the groups that are most effective at saving lives and reducing suffering are your neighbors. That's how it works. And so whether it's a first responder or a neighbor, to get the tools to those that are going to serve their community, and let them decide where and how they deploy them.
You do a weekly news show, and last week we did this part about a company in China that has small drones now that can potentially be used as ambulances. Have you looked into drones for drug, blood, vaccine, or even people ambulance service?
Yeah, I've heard about a lot of really cool drone aid, the intersection between drones and aid. We don't do, Footprint doesn't really do direct, right? So we aren't the ones serving the food. We're not really the ones plugging people the neighborhood's phones in. We're often the ones bringing a microgrid to a fire station or to a community aid hub, in North Carolina with Jamie, then setting it up, making sure it's working. The community group or the fire station is the one decides, okay, we're going to use this to charge our drones, or we're going to use it to charge our phones, or we're going to use it to charge our Starlink or whatever.
So you guys are the ones who show up with the truck with power. That's renewable power in the truck.
Exactly. The people at the site decide what then. We just try to get them the biggest battery we possibly can find and keep it and make sure it's charged, right? It stays charged. And but I've heard of the forefront of all this. Definitely, with a lot of drone recon for disaster response groups that we've seen. Our fleet has been drones. I would love to see a pilot where we're using drones to deliver deliver solar generators or batteries to a lot of these initiatives. It's all people, money, and time. The tech is there. I haven't heard of it where in the people are being airlifted to hospitals or being lifted out. I could totally imagine a pilot is close, or after Helene we were giving batteries to drop of helicopters duct taped to a Starlink, so that they would drop the Starlink down on a rope to a family or a group of people, 50, 60 people on the top of them couldn't get to on the road. So we were packaging the battery solar setup up and then handing it off to the National Guard, and they duct tape, wrap it in a bag with a Starlink, and fly it up the mountain and drop it off. It should all be done via drone. That's not hey, this should be swarmified. Although I think what people that are new to the space don't just how little how many actors are at play, and people think there's one monolith of FEMA's come in and solve it, or even the National Guard. Half the time it's multiple. You got FEMA, you got local firefighters, you got National Guard, you got the local first whether it's first responders or a local chapter of the Red Cross. You got all the volunteer groups that have just flooded that state. Like, it's just, the people think that there's like a plan, and it's a disaster. I mean, that's the
It's a
definition
chaos.
of yeah. So there's going to be the change the is through small, right, and pilot projects. But like when you said ask drones, it's like, I've yet to see, other than doing recon, I've yet to like a drone activated for delivery of physical support services.
In Africa, there's a that delivers vaccines and medicine through drones.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's I mean, that's where, again, like, a lot of this tech is now in the low resource countries. And then as the US through whether you collapse, restructuring, whatever you want to call what the US is going through right now, as we are getting less stable, there's a lot of valuable lessons that we can apply from, blood delivery via drone.
I have a relative who goes to her business, and she was telling me that they're getting packages, they're getting juice, food through drones in the middle of the park. You can just be walking and on your phone, order a coffee, and it'll be delivered to you by a drone.
Yeah.
For our audience of entrepreneurs and investors, what would you say the biggest barrier to entry for a new clean tech company trying to make a real world impact in disaster relief? And what kind of support do organizations like yours need most right now?
Great question. I mean, I'll answer it in reverse. So if entrepreneurs and investors that are interested in organizations doing disaster work, right? Like the direct response and resilience work, you're going to get the same org like ours. So the support will always be in a tiered basis of cash is king, then stuff if it's the right stuff, and then people if they're the right people. And I say that really just honestly because it's the truth. Research shows that donating cash during a disaster is the most effective, most sustainable way to support an affected community. It allows groups like us and others to buy local tech and services on site, which jumpstarts the economy. It's just obvious. If you want to do disaster, if you want to do philanthropy, way to start. Now, for startups and entrepreneurs that are trying to get into or engage with the disaster industry, because it is an industry, right? Like, we spend money on stuff. We aren't a state or federal contractor, but there's a whole subset of disaster capitalism businesses that provide services for hire in disasters. Some of those are good services. Some of them are more predatory. I'd argue that the backbone of community resilience work in the domestic US is done by nonprofits that are not taking disaster resources and funneling them to investors. They're using those resources to provide direct services to the community, or indirect services like us. We're an indirect, we're powering the community aid hub that is giving out the meal or charging people's phones at that site. And for companies investors and entrepreneurs that want to engage in that space, advise to start that. It's kind of like a do your homework game, like figure out what you want out of the space. Like, are you looking for marketing value? Are you looking for new technology? Are you trying to get your staff engaged because you have people in that region and you want them to be active in, what is the goal of your disaster engagement? And from there, to determine all right, are we, based on what size of the business you are, what you're looking to get out of the mission aligned or a vision aligned to the nonprofit or other partners to kind of hone that collaboration. Because at the end of the day, it's about collaborations. Like, none of the work we don't do anything alone. We're always powering some other group that is doing something great for their community. And for groups that are trying to engage in a disaster, it's all about finding the right partner, right? To find the right partner is you're looking for out of a partner, right? Going in.
Will, your story is truly inspiring. You've taken your direct experience on the front lines and applied it to solve a systemic problem with sustainable, purpose-driven solutions. You are a true clean titan.
That's very, very kind. I don't always feel like it. Thank you.
For our viewers, you can learn more about Will's work and how to support the mission at footprintproject.org. If you want more interviews that empower you to become part of the change, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'm Ali, and you've been watching Clean Titans. See you next time.